you for your patience while we got everybody seated. We are having a meeting tonight with the Bayridge community to give you an update on the soil vapor extraction system that is to be installed in this area. And then also, because we're experiencing delays with that, we are offering something called sub-slab depressurization systems, it's a mouthful, to some of the homes here. So we wanted to update you on that as well. Couple housekeeping things before we get going. First of all, my name's Tracy. I think some of you probably recognize me. I recognize you. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. When you came in, we're hoping that you signed in and you got a copy of this presentation. We'll be showing it on this screen, but I think some of you are looking into the sun, so that's not optimal. So if you don't have this, raise your hand, and Sarah over there will be glad to bring you one. Also, we're recording this meeting, so people that couldn't make it tonight can watch it on a YouTube channel. So the person recording it is over here. Marcos, wave your hand. And we want to get really good audio quality on the recording. So I'm hoping when you came in, just put this down, you got a card. And if you have questions, I'd really like you to write them on a card tonight, and then I will read them off so that we can get any viewer watching now or later, they can hear all the questions that are being asked. If you feel very strongly that you'd like to make a comment verbally, then just let me know. I'll hand you the microphone, I'll repeat the question, and then we'll have it answered. Okay? All right. Let me just go through what we're doing tonight. Okay. So I think everybody knows Jessica Law with the Water Board. She is our project manager. And then next to Jessica is Ken Connor. He's a senior vice president with WSP, formerly Wood Environmental. And then next to Ken is Mike Barnes. Mike Barnes was the project manager for 5 years on this project, stepped away for a year, and now he's back managing this project again, which is great because he brings a lot of history and knowledge of the area. I'm going to hand this to Mike just to really quickly say something, and then I'll take this back.
Hi, everyone. I think Tracy kind of summed it up. Took about a year off to try something else, and I've recently come back to work on this project. Excited to be back. Enjoy working with all of you and continue to try to meet common ground on getting this SBE system installed. So, thank you.
Okay, and then at the far end is Teresa, and she is our engineer on this project. And so she's the one that is working on the sub-slab system and also helping out with the SCP. And then finally, I'm sorry, I called you Teresa. What is wrong with me? I'm so sorry. So this is Teresa, and back here is Emily Miller, and she's also part of the team. I just want to remind everybody, there's food and water over there. You probably know where the restrooms are over here. I'm going to hand this over now to Jessica to give an update. If you have a question during this, just raise your hand. Sarah will come pick up your card, or I will, and we can stop the presentation at any time for clarifying questions. And then we'll stay here afterwards and answer any questions that you may have. Really important that we hear from you tonight, so we appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Good evening. Will you go up a slide? Two, I think. So I'm just going to provide kind of a remediation update, and we'll start. I always put this slide up. It's vapor intrusion kind of refresh. It's just really, so we're on slide 5 because that's not showing well. So slide 5 is just, it's got the figure that kind of shows the conceptual vapor intrusion model. But then on the left are all the definitions that we've been using. And just real quick, vapor intrusion, that would be the movement of vapors below the ground into buildings. And then we're going to be talking about subslab soil gas, and that's what's found directly below the foundation of the building. But then when we're talking about, say, soil vapor extraction, we're talking about that deeper soil gas. And indoor air is pretty self-explanatory there, and then we always have the preferential pathways. But again, just a list of some terminology and whatnot in that figure. If you'd go to the next slide. So we're on slide 6 in your handout. So I just wanted to touch on soil vapor extraction, SVE, and subslab depressurization, because for a while we've been hearing about the soil vapor extraction, and here about a month or two ago we had kind of a little pivot with this subslab depressurization systems. There were a few delays with getting the soil vapor extraction system installed, and that can be really typical with different sites. And because it's been prolonged, we want to make sure we're being protective of human health. And so that's why we are pivoting and working on getting subslab depressurizations installed at homes that have been offered air purifiers. And both the soil vapor extraction and the subslab depressurization systems would operate together. But I want to really just kind of quickly distinguish the two. So soil vapor extraction, that's a treatment system. What that's going to do, when it's used for any site, it's a cleanup technology, and it can remove source. In the case of this area, it is to control the extent and migration of the soil vapor plume. And then subslab depressurization, that's a mitigation system. So what that's going to do is that's going to stop or greatly reduce, and here it's going to prevent those vapors from going below the foundation into the home. Instead, it redirects those vapors through a piping, and it vents it to above the roof line. And that stops the vapor intrusion. So those work together. And the figure just shows how the subslab depressurization systems are being offered to the homes where vapor intrusion has been identified, but it's also within that area where the soil vapor extraction system is going to be covering. So the next slide, there's so many kind of concepts here that we've brought up. So we have soil vapor extraction, that's a cleanup technology, and we have subslab depressurization and air purifiers. And those are both mitigation systems, but I want to just spend a few minutes to distinguish the difference between each one. So when it comes to coverage area, the soil vapor extraction, that is a site-wide cleanup option. That is going to address that soil vapor plume that is causing the vapor intrusion in this community. Subslab depressurization systems, right now it is an individual unit design. So again, those that have been offered air purifiers have been offered to move forward with getting a subslab depressurization system installed. It is individual home mitigation. And then you have air purifiers, and those treat the vapors that have already gone into the home. So the big difference between air purifiers and subslab depressurization systems really is it is going to treat those chemicals or address the chemicals before they get into the home. And that's that next line, that purpose. You know, I'm gonna skip a little bit, but between SSD and air purifiers, the purpose of an air purifier is you're cleaning addressing those impacted vapors in the home already. SSD, it is going to block those vapors from going into the home by redirecting them. But I do have it listed, you know, it's not a cleanup solution. That soil vapor extraction, that is your most effective way to remove the vapors from below the ground so that it doesn't get into the home, and you know, can be addressed within that year or so. Then when it comes to location, the location of the soil vapor extraction system, that operates outside of the home but within the community. It is going to be designed to blend in with the community. The subslab depressurization systems, there's going to be some pictures later to show what that looks like, but that is located directly on the exterior of the home, and it is low profile and is being designed to blend in on the outside of the home. And then your air purifiers, for those that have them, they are that white unit that are loud, and I've we've been hearing from folks, and they are a little more noticeable. When it comes to noise, the soil vapor extraction system is being designed with several redundancies for noise reduction and is going to be within a building with soundproofing and meet the city requirements for that 24-hour operation. For the subslab depressurization system, that is also going to be quiet. It's right outside the home, but there is noise dampeners on the vent pipe to reduce any of that noise just from the operation of that blower, that vacuum that is pulling those vapors from below the ground and taking those to above the roof line. And then the air purifiers, those that have them, they're noisy. In order to effectively remove those VOCs from indoor air, they have to be. And then when it comes to visits, for all of it, everyone still we strongly encourage and recommend the routine indoor air monitoring. For soil vapor extraction, the visits are all on the exterior, dealing with the extraction wells and the building itself. With the subslab depressurization system, there's the routine equipment checks. They would come to the outside of the building monthly to make sure everything is operating correctly. And then there would be, as part of the indoor air sampling, they would be checking those subslab probes to make sure that the vacuum coverage is appropriate. And then with the air purifiers, same, indoor air sampling, but there would be that annual filter replacement on the air purifiers. And so then we can jump back to WSP to talk about the soil vapor extraction system.
So I'm going to stop right there. And does anybody have any questions? Because that was quite a bit of information, and you're following along on a handout, so a little difficult.
Tracy.
No.
Okay. Wait. Remember, we're videoing this, so I'm going to have you speak into the microphone. And then, I hear you have a beautiful voice. And then, I'm going to repeat it just because we want to make sure that.
I was curious about the monitoring for the indoor. I didn't hear you correctly. Is that once a year, or is that more frequently?
That's dependent on individual units from where you are at within the community, and it's based on risk calculations that were done about 2 years ago. And so if you have specific questions on the frequency, I think we could talk about that more at the end afterwards and identify where you're at and find out what that frequency is supposed to be.
Then my other question would be with the SSR is that right? No, SSD.
Uh-huh.
Can you opt at any time to have that if you've had an air purifier, or is that something you have to get immediately? Is there a time frame?
There is no time frame. Same with the air purifiers, or even, indoor air sampling. If you've never participated, or if you received air purifiers and then returned them because they were really loud, you can participate at any time. Once any of these have been offered, that offer stands.
Indefinitely.
Until there's no longer a need,
I see.
For as long as vapor intrusion is present, the offer stands.
Okay, and then just if you want to opt in at the end of the presentation, there's numbers that you can call to talk with Jessica, to talk with Mike at WSP. Okay, who else has a question before we move on?
Hi, this has never been explained to me completely, but who is paying for this? And to the extent you start putting wells in here, is it Ford Motor? Is it a subsidiary? And are you bonding or doing any kind of insurance for completion? In other words, can a project get started? Ford is in so-so financial shape. Do we run the risk here at all of an uncompleted project once you start your destructive process?
So it's Ford Motor Company is the responsible party, and as it stands right now, they are paying for everything, including the regulatory oversight, which is required by California Water Code. But then There is financial assurances that Ford provides annually, just from their historical involvement with their RCRA permit, particular permit when they had operated. They have to provide a financial assurance that they can fund the work that they're doing. And so they provide that annually. Oh. He said that didn't answer the question. Can you go back?
I can.
Yes.
So they would be on the hook. I mean,
Let's try again.
No, what we would become if they got into any kind of difficulty is an unsecured creditor with drills all over the place. And what I'm saying is, did they put in, do they have an estimate where they have bonded and insured completion of whatever they're doing here? I can't imagine in 5 years what they've spent in consultants alone. I think Ford has been into bankruptcy once. All the car manufacturers are highly leveraged. And now I'm saying, to me, it's a normal business question that they should be bonding and insuring for completion of this, not just their balance sheet.
I'll have Ken answer that because that's his client. So
Right. So, first of all, based on what Jessica was saying, there is a surety that is there regarding such sites going all the way back to the RCRA permit that they had held. So they have to turn in information along those lines that says if they're in the middle of some sort of cleanup that they have to go all the way to the end, and that they provide the information for that in case something were to happen. There's nothing that obviously we're seeing right now that tells us that they're going to get halfway into this and stop. And of all of the clients that we have, they're the ones that pay on time, take care of what's happening. This is not the only site that they have, and you know, I think that their credit is good for what's coming up.
does the city have? My question: some cities have will do bonds on, like, if they have wells in this street, they are bonded to make sure they get removed and stuff like that. I don't know if any of the county or city permits have required a bond like that.
I don't think that they have
Okay.
thus far, but again, there are certain things that even WSP would be on the hook for regarding if we got halfway into drilling a well and something went wrong, we still have to be the ones to make sure that it's completed, regardless of whether or not Ford is paying us. So there are backups to backups regarding this.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, then let's move forward with the
Sure.
update.
So the next section that we're going to talk about is the SVE, the soil vapor extraction update.
And Ken, I'm going to ask you every time to start with what page you're on, just because
Oh,
people
sure.
are following along. Thank you.
So it's page 9 that we're on in the slide deck. And it looks like this.
What is it? What's the title?
The title is SVE Update.
There you go. So page 9, SVE update.
So as you can imagine, there are a number of permissions, permitting, coordination that we are going through and that we have gone through. Some of these items deal with the water board, but also the permitting agencies here with the city of Newport Beach. The first one is the SVE Remedial Design Implementation Plan. We have to put forth a plan to the water board and have them review it. It does not mean that they get to tell us where things have to be or anything like that, but we have to do it within their approval process. We have received that approval for the implementation plan. We also have received the permission for the SVE well location and construction. We were granted that by Orange County Healthcare Agency. They're the ones that handle any sort of boring that goes into the ground within the county. On the SVE permit to construct and operate, this is an South Coast Air Quality Management District permit. Right now, we're still at the review stage, the technical review stage, but there will be a public comment period that we hope will start very soon here after they have gone through their technical review of the plan and the design that we have in front of them. The city limited term permit for treatment system building location, this is in front of the city right now. It's a rather complicated process. One of the first levels, we had received approval, and there was an appeal to that approval. We've had another meeting with the Planning Commission. They elected to do a continuance until June 22nd. We will be meeting at that time with the information from what the meeting, I believe, on May 18th had brought up. So that is still in the process. The city building permit for construction of trenches and treatment system building, that's also with the city for approval, the city of Newport Beach for approval. And then last for this particular process, the electrical connection, we are working through the access agreements that we need with Belcourt Terrace and Belcourt Master in order to progress with the connection, with the electrical connection that will be coming up. The upcoming field activities that we have at present will be the SVE well installation, and I believe, have we started that? Yeah, so we have started that. You might have seen drill rigs within the area doing work during the day, but we are in the middle of that. At some time in the future, we'll start with the SVE trenching activities. Regardless of where the building goes, we're going to need those trenches to connect from the actual well locations back to a treatment system. We're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that this is something that we won't have to redo at some point in the future, but those activities will start hopefully very soon. And then last, but the one that needs the limited term permit is the SVE treatment system installation, which will be the laydown of the building and also the installation of the equipment inside the building. On slide 10, and at the top of it, it says SVE well installation, and has a picture over to the right-hand side of the page. Okay. The installation, the SVE well installation is in progress. It started somewhere around May 30th. There will be an installation of 13 SVE wells. If you look at the page, those are the green dots that you see on the page. A notice of work was sent to all residents involved with this, including we make sure that we have phone calls for those residents that are being impacted for the temporarily blocking of certain parking spots. As I said before, what you will see out in the community will be a drill rig with some support equipment, and we're thinking that this is going to continue for about another 2 weeks, week and a half, somewhere in there, 15. On page 11, which is the trenching and pipe laying section, right? I also wanted to mention that the SVE well locations will not change regardless of what happens with the treatment building location, that those are also set because we need a certain radius of influence. We need to be able to pull a certain amount of air through through the soil in order to achieve this influence in order to be cleaning the soil. On the trenching and pipe laying, we're looking at this in 6 phases. It'll be 500 feet per phase. 250 feet will be open, but we'll have trench plates over it each night. we're looking at 3 to 4 weeks per phase, but when you look at this diagram, we're looking at phase 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, and then 6 to tie back in. Okay? So
Ken, can you tell them the colors on those phases as well?
Sure.
I think we have it color coded.
and hopefully I'm accurate on this.
Okay, Mike's there.
So, phase 1 is red-orange. Phase 2 is the darker purple-blue. Phase 3 is partially this green over by the treatment system. Phase 4 is the lighter blue. And then phase 5 is the yellow up toward the top.
Perfect.
Okay? On slide 12, you have 2 different pictures. One is an actual picture of what exists right now. The other one is the rendering of where we think that the treatment building will go that holds the treatment unit. Some things to keep in mind when you're looking at the slide, and again, this is slide 12. When you're looking at the slide, when you're looking at the rendering, there is a location that's being shown for the stack or the exhaust. Okay, this is on top of the building, and it's closer to the roof line overall.
The
Okay, hang on.
question was, where's the power coming from? And that's where they're pulling it. The only right now viable distribution location that can power the system is over in Belcourt Master. And why there's that access that he had mentioned with Belcourt Master and Belcourt Terrace, because they have to trench from over there to get the system.
So,
Yeah.
if
That
we-
was the process.
if
I
we-
have another clarifying question.
Sure, of course.
Does that mean that there'll be our vapor extraction shed, that's what it looks like, is also going to be purifying Belcourt Terrace?
No, they're going to have their own. They will have their own.
They'll have their own
Yeah.
shed?
Right.
Yep. They're going to have their own treatment system in wells.
I have one more question here.
Yes, of course.
So I might have missed a meeting, but the last time I attended was at the community center down at the park. We did a very similar presentation. You put up the image of the building, and the comment was, you have promised us from day one that you would match aesthetics, that you would consider design considerations, et cetera, and our comment at the last meeting was, it's a prefab shed. You're buying a prefab building. It looks like a storage shed, okay? And you personally committed that this isn't what it's going to look like, that we will enhance the architecture and it will look just like all of your units. So I guess my question is, how about faux windows? How about some wood beam trellises like everything around our unit? Because that looks like something somebody puts their lawnmower in. And honestly, you personally addressed this and committed to us, and now you're coming back with this. I'm appalled. I'm disappointed.
Okay. Understood. We are going to make good on the promise that I made, and there will be architectural renderings on it to make it look more like the units themselves.
Okay, so
I
I'm
do
just-
remember saying that.
That's not what you show.
Okay, but I just want to clarify that he said that he'll do that, and I know you can only know what you see. But he said that they'll put trellises on and look at that. And if you have some suggestions, why don't you talk with me after? I'll make sure that Ken gets those. And the one thing I do want to say is I believe the building is being built off-site to limit construction impact. So that was
Right.
something that I think we agreed to as well.
But-
But understood, the rendering is not what you expected to see tonight. We will put a better one together. Okay, any other questions right now? Okay, go ahead.
Let's go to slide 13, which at the top of it says the SVE system performance monitoring. So there's text on the left-hand side of the page, and the diagram on the right side of the page, giving you an idea of the area of influence, and also the locations for where the wells are, and what we're trying to do as far as coverage for the SVE system. On the SVE system performance monitoring, there's going to be performance monitoring at the treatment system itself. There'll be measurements within the building. There'll be measurements at the stack level on a basis that's set by the air permitting board, the air district. There'll also be performance monitoring through soil gas at the monitoring wells themselves. Both sets of monitoring give us an idea of how the system is operating, what type of vapor and what type of concentrations are being pulled in, what the level of dilution is between the wells and the front end of what's called the blower that provides the vacuum. There will also be a sub-slab monitoring that will be going on during the process to see what type of influence we're getting on the sub-slab areas. Many of the units that are impacted have the monitoring devices, some of the pins already. Those units that would have the SSDs in at that time would also have some of the monitoring devices, but we'll also install others to make sure that we're getting the influence that we're hoping for, and that we're getting the reduction in the vapors that were there. In addition to all of this, there's going to be indoor air monitoring 1 to 2 times a year, again, based on agreement with the regulatory agencies, but also to have an idea for those areas that have had the vapor intrusion levels at a higher level. They'll probably get more monitoring just to make sure that we're on the right track. Any questions on any of that?
Okay, hang on one moment.
And while you're walking over there, I'll add that the monitoring that Ken just mentioned, it was items listed in our response to either the feasibility study and remedial action plan or the remedial design and implementation plan, because there's modeling that goes into the design system, and the regulatory agency, Water Board, we always want to see actual data that the system is performing the way it's intended to. And one of those things would be reduction of soil vapor concentrations below the foundations, that there is that little bit of vacuum effect to take the vapors and draw them away from below the foundation so that they don't go into the homes, that the indoor air is no longer a risk to the residents and those things. And so those are certain requirements that we have requested, or certain items that we want to see to know its effectiveness.
I just have a question on the location of the shed. I know it's needed, and it, by my mind, it looks fine. I would just like to know if there are board members here, if they could tell us why other locations were rejected, and it was deemed to be put 3 feet from our neighbor's home and about 25 feet from our home and your home, and we're wondering why this shed isn't placed in the northeast section there on that. There's about 7 or 8 parking places. You could take up about half of them at the most, maybe fewer, and have that well away from a resident. Why in God's name is a building like this going to be put 3 feet from a young mother and expecting another child, and the rest of us in that vicinity have to know that there's something being processed there, and we have to trust that it's going to be safe with no real-time monitoring. And even if it never has a problem with the, I understand the pipes can leak. That's one of the things that can happen with SVE systems. Why on earth is it put so close to residents? Can some board member come up and give us that explanation? I would very much appreciate it.
Okay, I actually don't know if there's a board member here. I think, here we go.
One of the board members.
Hold on, let me give you the microphone.
Yeah, I'll stand here because I'm going to need some assistance.
Hold on.
Sure. Thank you, Tracy. Hello, my name is Enrique. I'm on the board. This came by recommendation. All right, so they, if I understand, they calculated the system, and the system runs efficiently in that location. That's what it came down to. Am I correct in that?
Correct. There were a number of criteria that we looked at, not just whether or not there were parking spaces that were available, but there were other criteria that we had to look at, including where the electrical was available to us. Because we could not get a power drop there off of Bison, because SoCal Edison had indicated to us several times that the only location that we have is the one over by Belcourt Terrace and the Master area, that we had to use that location. If we were going to run conduit and conductors, the copper wiring all the way over to the northeast corner, those wires would have to be much, much larger. There would be a larger trench, a deeper trench, and a wider trench that we would have to put in. Plus, in addition to all of this, there wouldn't have been the setback toward sending the vapor toward a roadway. That was one other issue that we were running into. If we were going to put the treatment unit there as well, there was probably twice the amount of piping that we were going to have to deal with going back and forth between the treatment unit and the wells themselves. So when we did our analysis, when we looked at this, even taking into account that we could take parking spaces, we still ran into engineering and institutional problems, not of our own, but based on the utilities that we're running into. I've had a number of people, both at, I think it's Belcourt Master and in other locations, challenge the idea of the SoCal Edison power drops. But every time that we've talked with them, every situation that we've gotten into, there has been, yeah, we might be able to do that, but there'd be a 2-year delay in order to make sure that it could happen. There were also additional issues that we had with a power drop closer to Bison because of the moratorium that's in place. So everything taken into account.
Ken, I'm just going to ask you to explain that moratorium. I don't think probably everybody knows
There
what the
was
moratorium. And hang on.
Let's wait for you there. There was a moratorium to any sort of trenching or cut or fill work around Bison Avenue that still is in place at this point in time. It's going to be running for about 5 years. We have had this situation checked out by the city of Newport Beach. They've said, yes, this is in place. There's no way that we're going to allow this to happen. We've already cut up the street several times. And any follow-up to that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hang on 1 second.
Thanks, Ken. I'm Amy Santella, the homeowner at 94 Hartford Drive. So just so everyone's aware, we are the appellants that did appeal the permit process for this because it's 3 feet away from our window. So we can literally stick our arm out of the dining room window and touch it. And Ken talked about the Planning Commission meeting, but he did not mention that several of the planning commissioners for the city of Newport Beach agreed with us and did not support this location and all the infeasibilities that Ken spoke about. The planning commissioners, who all have extensive background in land development and building, they mentioned that just because something isn't feasible doesn't mean it's impossible. So they actually came out on site, came to our home, looked around the area, and saw how close it was. So not only is it too close to our home, it's too close to the sidewalk, and they discovered the day of the planning commission meeting that it's right next to a water main line, which is going to change how it's anchored into the ground. And the city even said that, you know, too close to the water main line was making a compromise. So there are a lot of infeasibilities, and like I know Ken had said, you know, there's a moratorium on bison. Well, one of the planning commissioners even mentioned that's the city's own moratorium. It's not the county, it's not the state, so maybe there's something that can be done with that. The slope stability with the retaining wall. They said, you know, nothing's ever been built on a slight slope before, so there are other options, and we are taking the brunt of this entire project by having it 3 feet away from our home. Our son is back there. We're expecting a newborn baby. There's so many unknowns. We have asked WSP multiple times for examples of this done in a residential residential area. And the examples they sent us were from commercial facilities, and the one residential example they sent, it's all available on the city website too, so all these documents and pictures can be on the city website for those that are interested. But the one example they sent us of a residential treatment building was from a boarded up vacant military base that had been shut down for 10 years prior to the cleanup. So again, they've failed to show us any residential examples. You know, I could keep going on and on. The HOA was also not present at the Planning Commission meeting, and the cause for the continuance was actually voted on for the Planning Commission members for the HOA to speak with WSP and go back and look at all the infeasibilities and try to look for alternative locations. I've reached out to the board, I've reached out to WSP asking for updates on, you know, the continuance. So that's where we are yet now, and I haven't received any responses back. I spoke to Mike earlier. We're supposed to get a document tomorrow, so I'll be interested to see what that says. But again, the city, several of the members supported us and said this is too close to a home. But here we are today with a new rendering, still 3 feet away from our home, and we're just moving on through like nothing is being held up with the city. So thank you.
Okay, hang on one second, okay. Ken, did you want to say anything, or can I keep taking?
Oh, let's go ahead and take another
Okay,
question.
perfect. I think, wait, this gentleman raised his hand, and then you. And I would just say, if you have something different to say, let's do that and get through the presentation, and then we can save time afterwards for comments.
Just to follow up on the presentation comments, it sounds like every decision that you've made every step of the way has been a decision that's advantageous to moving the project forward and not advantageous to homeowners, even in lieu of increased safety risks. And I agree. I don't think you guys have done enough homework or done your job. I think you're settling for what's convenient, easy, and cheaper for you to move forward.
Okay. Ken, did you want to say something about the 22 homes here?
Yeah,
Because
so
I do think you need to clarify that.
So, from both sets of comments that were just made, we have to be clear about one thing. The reason why time is of the essence is because we know that there are at least 22 homes, and because not everyone got tested for indoor air, there might even be more homes than that are exhibiting vapor intrusion at this point in time. And no matter what we do, even with the air purifying units, or even if we do something with the SSDs, with the subslab depressurization, nothing is as good as doing the soil vapor extraction and actually removing the contaminants to begin with. Nothing is going to be better than that. So on the timing issue, each one of the changes that we're looking at right now, or that we have looked at, set us back another 2.5 years. Not only because of equipment issues, but because of further permitting. And just because one group will say, I don't want it near my home, That doesn't mean that when we move it someplace else, that there won't be 5 times that many people saying, I don't want it by my house. The issue throughout all of this has been that we have put together a design that is completely safe. And we're using a technology which is completely safe and is used on thousands of locations throughout the United States. And because there isn't a database which shows SVE within X number of feet of a building, doesn't mean that there isn't something at the air district or the air districts throughout California that will show you each location that has a permitted facility like this, many of them not too far away from here. The entire side of the safety issue will also be looked at during the air district permitting process. As far as the proximity of the building to any of the homes, it's the measuring point for the safety aspect of it that is the stack. And it's 2 different measurements that you have to have. One of them is the height of the stack to allow for dispersion whenever there's air moving around like this. But there's also the separation from the nearest window. And in both cases, the design that we have is well within and exceeds the safety factors that the air district will be looking at.
Okay, but it will be permitted by the air district, so that's another permitting agency.
That's the
Okay.
other level.
I just want to make that clear to people.
The other thing, the last thing that I want to say
Let
is,
me just clarify this one thing. Jessica is with the water board, and then the city has a permit, a limited term permit, I believe, and that is for construction of the building, and it's for a variance to the 3 feet of separation. And then the SVE system itself is permitted by the air district, so the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Yes, they're aware of this. There'll be a public comment period on that as well, and that will be a permit to operate and to permit to construct and operate. They have not started that process yet. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that.
the gentleman has a
Yes.
question.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and to me, they sound like, more money would have to be spent, maybe bigger vacuum system or, different kinds of electrical to make it work to be away from somebody's home. I don't think there's any resident here, correct me if I'm wrong, that would volunteer to want to live 3 feet from this building. I just don't see that. And we need to put this in perspective. The plant was operating about 50 years, plus or minus. It made a lot of profit, I assume, during that time. And then they sold the land, bought it from Irvine Company, and sold it for a $100 million profit. And we've been here in this development since the mid-'80s. So I don't understand what the big rush is all of a sudden to do something that would most likely have been more beneficial to have been done in 1989 or 90 or 95 or 2000 when these vapors were coming up probably in greater numbers than, greater volume than they are now. So if there's 20 homes that need remedial work, why don't we get them some super duper indoor air VOC systems that can filter them and make them safe, while we make sure we make this family safe and my neighbors safe and us safe, so we don't have to even have the psychological problem of sleeping next to something that we don't. You say it's safe, that's great. I don't know that it's safe. There's no real-time monitoring. These pipes can leak. Things happen. So I don't know why we would want to take that liability on, legally or otherwise, if something happens.
Okay, so I think that...
So let me answer.
Go ahead.
Let me answer that. So, first of all, we know with certainty that there's vapor intrusion happening in the 22 homes. And we know with certainty that there are levels that have been achieved within those domiciles that trigger a level that EPA says you need to do more investigation, you need to do some work. We also know that the main issue, the main pathway, the main thing that prompts a safety issue is the vapor intrusion. The idea that the vapor is underneath a building, that over time it's taking advantage of cracks that are in a slab and accumulating within a house over a certain period of time. Everything that we're doing on the SVE side, once we pull the vapor out of the ground and once it goes through the pipes, at the same time it's being diluted and it's at concentrations which are safe. The idea that the concentration in the ground is the same concentration that you would encounter if something happened with the SVE is just not correct. That's not the way that the system works. And if the pipes were leaking, they won't be, but if they were leaking, it's a vacuum. You would lose the vacuum and the material that was in the pipe wouldn't be seeping out. So on every level, the way that we've designed this, the way that SVE works, the way that the system has a two-step process to treat the off gas that's coming from the blower, and even the exhaust point, all puts this well within that risk range that is more than acceptable by EPA, and certainly much better than the risk if we do nothing and continue to allow vapor intrusion to happen.
And I'll just add on the timing of why we are pushing and wanting this done yesterday. At this point, right, is I've mentioned in past meetings, TCE has that short-term exposure risk, and this was not knowledge. This industry was not aware of this until about 2014, when a little prior to that, but in 2014, the U.S. EPA issued a memo regarding heart malformations in developing fetuses, and so there's these really low screening levels or action levels for that, and that's where there is that sense of urgency. And we have seen those exceedances in this community because that is one of the COCs, and that's why, as part of the very first work plan to start collecting soil vapor sampling, we did everything intentionally to be protective of that potential risk. So areas that had the higher soil gas concentrations, Bayridge Park. That's why all of the work started here first. Same with the indoor air sampling. And then the way it worked was, if those concentrations were identified, as they were collecting those samples, the air purifiers were being already ordered to have in place, just, so they could be delivered same day. Because typically those take, on a good day, 2 weeks to order. And so we were wanting to make sure, if we identified this problem in any of the homes sampled, that it could be addressed immediately. And then when it comes to this, development has been here since the 80s, and Ford had operated, and there was that contamination and the cleanup and all of that. One of the things that we're noticing, and this is just from sites that I oversee the other ones where there's residential sampling, but really here we have a really large data set. And some of the trends and things that we see when evaluating vapor intrusion, period, is newer developments tend to have much less vapor intrusion, or what we refer to as the attenuation factor is much lower, meaning there is much less vapors from below the ground that get into indoor air because the Foundations tend to be intact better. There's fewer cracks, things like that. As a building ages and they're settling, that's where you get the cracks and these preferential pathways that open up and allow that vapor intrusion to occur easier. And we are seeing that now of the communities being tested. We're seeing that here. And so that is where that urgency is coming from. We're hearing the concerns and stuff. And so I will say that's where from a wanting to be protective of the residents, the ones who have participated in the indoor sampling and those that have not. We still want all buildings protected. The most efficient, effective way is to clean up the soil vapor. That being said, however the process, I appreciate and value everyone's input and feedback and all of that. So there is, I encourage every appeal. If you're not comfortable with it, get more information, definitely. In the meantime, one of the transitions that the water board will be taking is to go and look more at building-wide sub-slab depressurization systems, because we need to be protective of all occupants. All buildings that are within that area where we see current and future vapor intrusion, there is the need to be protective. And we do this on all our sites where there is just unacceptable risk, whether it's current or future, because we look at both. We know that buildings can further degrade over time and vapor intrusion can increase, depends on building ventilation. There's so many variables that play a role, and it is unit by unit specific. And because it's so unpredictable and can fluctuate so significantly, and we're dealing with a contaminant that has that short-term exposure risk, this is some of the options that we can do to at least address, to make sure the residents are protected while we come up with that long-term solution. But that is where that urgency is coming from. We want to be protective of human health.
Okay, so I'm just going to recap for people. So we have the Ford and WSP and the Water Board are proposing a soil vapor extraction system. There's a permit in with the city. It's been appealed by a resident. We're going to go through the appeal process with the city. Planning Commissioner meeting, June 22nd. There'll be a document coming out with more information on responses to comments there that will be public. And then to the gentleman in the back, his question about what are you going to do? Maybe you can do something to protect these 20 or maybe more residents that are actually experiencing soil vapor intrusion. That's the next part of our presentation. So I just want to be respectful of everybody's time, and with your permission, I'd like to go into that next part, which is what are we doing? So just remember, soil vapor extraction would treat the source. Sub-slab depressurization systems are individual for homes, and they're mitigation measures. So they let people occupy your homes safely till we figure out the long-term solution. So we have a second part of this presentation, and with your permission, I'd like to go into that, and then people that got all the information they want, they can leave. People that have more questions or concerns will stay and answer every question. And so does that work for everybody? If it does, can we raise our hands, because I know people are a little bit emotional, so I just don't want anybody to feel left out.
And I just want to clarify real quick. It's Ford and WSP are proposing the soil vapor extraction because we are requiring the cleanup and abatement of the contamination, and that it's our, we are concurring with the methods of cleanup.
Thank you for that, yes, because they're the regulator.
I want to make that
Absolutely,
distinction.
there's a huge distinction there. They are oversight regulatory agency. They propose what they want to do, and they say, yes, we concur with that, and we think that will fix the problem.
I just want to address one last thing. We're working with these acronyms, SVE, SSD, and also working with the air purifying units. As Jessica has mentioned several times, not just in this on this forum, but in other meetings, the SSD only helps us for a limited time. It is not a long-term solution. It does not remediate anything. It just stops a pathway for a certain period of time. Things can happen. The slab could settle. Other things can happen that will cause other pathways to open up. This is the reason why the SSD is not a permanent solution. That even if you were in another location, it would not be the be-all, end-all. It is only meant to buy you enough time to slow down or to dissipate all of the vapor intrusion until such time that you can remove the mass, until you can remove that material. So I just wanted to make sure of that.
Okay. An SSD, again, sub-slab depressurization system. Those are for individual homes. That's what the next part of this presentation is. So I'd like you to start giving that if you would.
Sounds great.
And make sure that you orient people with the slide number, the name. I think this is the last part of the presentation, probably 10 more minutes, and then we'll take all the questions and answers and comments that people have. And if you can write them, that would be great, but I also realize that some people want to identify with their comment, and if that's the case, I'll bring the microphone over to you at that time.
Thanks, Tracy. So we're on slide 15 right now. It's SSD system. I know it's sub-slab depressurization, but I might say SSD for these couple slides. Thanks, Ken. So as we've kind of repeated several times, we are offering these individual units to the 22 residents that have already been offered air purifiers. So we've already been in contact with them. We also have about a handful of them that are interested. There's probably some here. Thank you very much. So these are going to be installed on individual units. This is not going to be building-wide. At this point, it's going to be individual units. So pretty much it's very simple. If you look to the right in the picture, this is an example. It's a very simple unit that gets installed on the side of the house. So it's piping that's underneath your home. It's going to extract vapors, and then it's going to be a fan that pulls those vapors up to the roof line. So like Jessica had mentioned, we're going to prevent the vapors from entering your home. So you kind of think of that as if there's vapors that are going to kind of seep up into your home, instead that extraction point is going to pull all those vapors up and out, and it's not going to allow it to go into the home. They're very quiet. They're on the outside of the home. There's a fan, but there's also a dampener, so that's also positive. I know some of you guys have air purifiers, and there has been some commenting that they're very loud, so this is an option. You won't have to run the air purifiers if you have an SSD system operating. This is a better way to remove those vapors. They're not going to come into your home. They're going to be treated before they go in. It's low profile. It should match the outside of the home. And again, it's commonly used all around the country. I always give the example of a radon unit. I know those are not quite the same, but they look the same. And so, those have been used all around the country. It's the same type of technology. So I guess the last bullet on here is SSD systems will be permanently removed once the vapor intrusion risk has been addressed. And that kind of reiterates what Ken was saying, that if we don't do the SVE, the SSD systems will run for a long time. So they'll just keep running until we actually address the actual mass that's in the ground. So we'll go on to the next slide, 16. So this slide kind of gives you two different layouts of the same thing. On the left, you're kind of getting a diagram, and on the right, it's also a diagram, but we kind of put it against some of the backdrop of Bayridge Park. So I'm going to actually go from the bottom and move my way up. So if you look at the bottom, there's going to be this extraction piping that we had mentioned. So this is a horizontal pipe that they will put underneath the home into the sub-slab. It's about 10 feet. The goal is to get it kind of in the middle of the unit, underneath the middle of the unit, so we can get good radius and get the influence of all the air come out. So once it comes out, it's going to connect to this pipe that goes up to the roof line. And in the pipe, there's going to be some inline units. It's going to be a carbon treatment unit, which is actually like a miniature version of what the SVE will have. And this is going to treat any vapors that they pull out. So once it goes through the carbon unit, I should have mentioned before, the blower is above it, and that's actually what's going to be pulling the vapors. So the blower is right above that, and then we are adding a noise dampener just based on comments that we've received on everything else, just to make sure that it's extra quiet. And then it's going to go to the roof line, and it will be discharged air above the roof line. So just to kind of give you a reference, on the right, if you look at the square, the blower, that's about 6.5 feet high. So the whole thing will be about 7 feet. And then the one other item, which I guess, do you want to pass these around? I brought some show and tell. So these are the vapor pins. So all of this will happen outside of your home, but for the people that got offered it. But we do need to put 2 monitoring points within the home, and these are called vapor pins. So what we'll do is we actually did a little site walk at one unit today. So we found great locations in closets where these would be installed. So they're very, I guess you wouldn't know they're in there. So we would put 2 of these inside the home, and these are the things that we would monitor every 6 months just to make sure we're getting good pressure. So we can move on to the next slide. And this is actually just 2 more examples of SSD systems. And we have been talking to our contractor about matching paint and making sure we paint the pipes and things. So, and I think we're going to talk about the schedule of that on a couple slides, so I'm going to leave it there.
Yes. I'm going to have.
On the noise that comes out of from the SSD, if I'm sitting on my patio having a family meal, are we going to be comfortable? How loud are they?
Well, it's like a little fan, but with the dampener, it's even going to be quieter. Yeah.
And the
Much quieter
purifiers.
than, yes, definitely.
Much.
Yeah. It's just like air coming out, but we dampen it so you can't hear the whistling or anything. So.
Okay, let's move on and get through the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. I think our next slide is schedule, if I'm not mistaken. Is that you, Ken? Number 19, it reads tentative schedule. I can read that from here. If it was in front of me, I couldn't.
The schedule is I'm sorry. So the schedule is on page 19.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the form of what we call a Gantt chart. If you look at it, you're starting on the left-hand side of the page. There are 2 items. There's the SVE and SSD that are going vertical. And then if you read across on the SVE side, you see the schedule regarding the permitting and coordinating with the community. That's the items that I was talking about earlier, where we're getting permits and approvals from different entities in order to operate the system, but also to implement and construct this system. And then the actual implementation and construction of the system, we're looking at a date around the mid part of September. Right now, it looks like it's starting on 9/11 in September. Below that, on the SVE, you see the next public commission hearing. You also see what we're looking at on the city council hearing side of things. And then if you also look below that on the SVE, it has this time period in which we might be looking at an appeal period. The operation of the system, and we haven't even talked about that yet as far as the start of it, but we're targeting that toward the middle part of February of 2024. If we could do it sooner than that, we obviously will, because we want to make sure that we're removing vapor as soon as possible. On the SSD side, the sub-slab depressurization, you look at the permitting and coordinating with the community. There aren't as many permits, but more of the permits, I think, have more, not permits, but more of the coordination has more to do with interfacing with the HOA and the local community. The implementation of the SSD systems, that is the construction, and I think we're looking at 8 to start with right now. 7 or 8. Mm-hmm. We're looking at starting that sometime around July 10th. This does not mean that it'll take just for one SSD. It'll take several months. Probably won't. But we are looking at doing that in a way that we can get at least one in as quickly as possible and have the operation of that toward the end of July. So that is fast-paced, fast-tracked system to get that in. But again, that's just for the mitigation side in order to give us some time so that we can get the SVE in and operational.
Can I make a comment on the SSD?
Sure, of course.
So I know I got some access agreements from people, and we are going to be reaching out to you tomorrow, actually, to try to set up some times to come to your home and do the sidewalk. So I'm here after this if you want to talk about it, but you will be hearing from Michelle tomorrow to start lining up some times the week of June 19th to talk about installation.
The next section that we're going to talk about will be communications and preparedness. And this is on slide 21. That looks like this. Just 3 bullets. Sure. Go ahead.
So, take that out, sorry. Scoot over a little bit again. So just real quickly, we want to touch on some of the communication process that we have in place. I'm sure you've all have received the notices of work that go out anytime we're going to be doing work that could potentially impact the community, specifically in front of somebody's home. We send out notices of work to identify what work's going to be completed, a time frame associated with that work to make sure people are aware of that process. And then recently, we've been implementing weekly updates via email for anybody that's signed up for that email distribution list. If anybody is not receiving those emails, please work with Sarah to get provide her with your email address, and we'll make sure to include you on future distributions. And then, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is specific to the SVE installation, well installation work that's going on right now. We're providing 24-hour and 48-hour notice to individuals where they're going to be directly impacted, where the drill rig's going to be in front of their house. They may not have access to a parking spot or a garage. And then also the day of, we're knocking on doors to let them know and remind them that we're there. So those are some of the steps that we take to make sure the community is aware of all the work that's going on, in addition to the meetings that we've had. Sure. And then contact information, of course, feel free to reach out to Ken, but I should be considered your primary point of contact from WSP. My number's here. I'm sure you've all seen or received one of the cards that has the 800 number. That 800 number goes to John, basically, and then John will steer that question to the appropriate person. I see all of them, but I will respond to some of those if it's appropriate. If it's an engineer or something related to health risk, you may receive a different call from one of our team members. And then, of course, Jessica's always willing to take phone calls and emails, and her information is listed there as well.
Okay, I think that does it. So I'm going to just recap. So soil vapor extraction treatment system, the building is proposed over the building. This is working, yeah. The building is proposed. We're going through a city permitting process. It's been appealed. We're up in front of the Planning Commission on June 22nd. There'll be a document on the website that's a response to comment that everybody is available. It will be available for everybody to look at. And then there's a contingent of folks that aren't happy with that location. There's other folks that do want that to be installed. So that's one thing we talked about tonight, and that's the actual remediation, so it would be treating the source. The second thing we talked about was the sub-slab depressurization systems. Those are those individual units for people's homes. Those are mitigation, so they don't solve the problem, but what they do solve is they make the home, they take the vapors out and keep them out of the home until we can get that long-term remediation going. So there are two things going on there, and I just want to make sure that's clear. And now we have time for questions, comments. I'd like to start with people that took the time to fill these out, and I'll collect them and read them. And then I'll be happy to hand the microphone to anybody that wants to identify with their question. Again, we are recording this, and we know that there's some interest, so we're trying to be as clear as possible for future listeners. So if anybody has a card that they wouldn't mind me reading the question, Sarah will pick it up, and we'll read that. And then after that, I'll read a few of those, and then if somebody has a burning desire to speak into the microphone, I will be happy to bring it to them. Does that sound fair? Okay. All right. Okay. No.
Stay away.
I know. I learned my lesson. So first question. Oh, and I would ask you too, if you'd like to put your name and address on it, you don't have to. But if you want to, and you want me to read that, I'm happy to do that too. So first question, what is the environmental impact the project will have on the community?
It'll get the site cleaned up and then ultimately the case closed. That's the goal.
Okay. So it will be impactful just in terms of construction, but the ultimate result with the soil vapor extraction, it will remove the source of contamination.
Now, if you're asking if there was an EIR that was done.
There's a next question here, so
Oh.
it's related to that.
Okay.
Okay, do you have permission to proceed with this drilling, digging project from CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act?
So for these kind of cases, it is CEQA exempt, and it's addressing the contamination. And so these site cleanup cases don't go through that same CEQA process or have the environmental impact reports because it is addressing that contamination and
It's considered leaving it better than
Yeah.
it found it, I think.
Yeah.
And environmental impact reports are a study of possible impacts across a whole group of things.
I'm just drawing a blank right now on the exemption codes for them. I can look it up. Oh,
Emily knows
there
them.
we go.
I believe the one
Closer
that
to the
we-
microphone,
Okay.
please.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I believe the one that we landed on as the most relevant was Class 8 exemption. We also looked at Class 30 exemption, and there were a couple of others that we talked to the city about. But yeah, there are a number of exemptions that apply.
Okay, great. And then the last question here is, how will you contact us if an emergency occurs?
So I know that the treatment system itself, or close to the treatment system, will have a 1-800 number that's managed 24 hours a day, and then that would come to us. As far as a communication, as far as an emergency goes, we do have contact information for everybody that's provided their phone numbers and emails. We don't anticipate any sort of emergency occurring with the treatment system, as Ken indicated. If the treatment system were to fail, such as a pipe were to break or anything, it is under vacuum, and so no discharge of vapors would occur. If there was a catastrophic event, the system would shut down.
Okay, thank you.
And I was going to reiterate the same. These remediation systems have a number of redundancies from the decades of use and permits, and it's the same with how we even do assessments and cleanups. There have been lessons learned over the decades in this field, and from that, there are so many protective measures and redundancies and backups to backups that are in place. And part of it, I mean, from even 10 years ago when I was on the consulting side and seeing some of like the engineering and how these systems were completed and done and monitored back then is so different to how it's done now, because now everything is done virtually, and they still have folks that come on, but now every engineer for these sites has their tablet or it's on their desktop, and they can open it up and see what is going on and know the state of the system. So that way, because the big concern here, and it would be with an SSD system, if the system goes down, we want to know, because then it's not removing the vapors, and now it's downtime. It's going to make the cleanup last. Every day that system is down, the cleanup lasts an extra day. And so they want that up and running. And one of the things they report out each quarter to us is runtime, because that matters. We want to know that that system is working effectively and is not having, blown fuses or whatever causes the system to stop. And the system will shut down if any of these fail-safes get triggered. And again, it's to protect the system itself, but it's to protect the public around as well. So.
Okay, I just want to add two things. Our 800 number is a voice over internet protocol, which means that we get emails and text messages, and we are on that 24/7. And then also as a routine part of any project, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, before we break ground, if it was for the SVE system, we coordinate with police and fire so that they know how to come in and come out, and they're aware of the project. And if anything happens that is catastrophic, we have a phone tree that we work off of. So that's a normal part of any kind of construction project. That's a first step in the health and safety that we do. So I just want to be clear on that.
And Emily's got something else.
And the system itself with the electronical controls that are set up will have an alarm system, and they will call the system engineer. We'll get alarm calls from all of our treatment system sites, so we're trained to have our phones on us and respond immediately if we get a call directly from the system. So people wouldn't have to call us. The system will call us itself.
Okay, great. Okay, moving on. I'd like to know who actually wrote this, if you don't mind raising your hand. We did not receive a phone call when work was being done in front of our home for wells or a knock on the door, like Mike said. Neighbors did not receive notifications either. However, the workers were very nice and accommodating going in and out of our home. Well, I'm glad to hear that, but I'm not glad to hear the first part. So I don't know if who wrote that can let us know who they were, because I'd like to make sure that we are doing what we say we're going to do. And you don't have to out yourself in front of everybody. Just come see, come see me afterwards, I guess, right? And I'm sorry. I apologize about that. But thank you for, we will improve. Okay. Now I have quite a few questions here. Schedule. When can we get a detailed schedule? CPM schedule, I think that is.
Right.
So, what does CPM mean?
Pardon?
CPM, what does that mean?
Yeah, critical.
Critical path management?
Right.
When can we get a detailed critical path management schedule?
We will be releasing a schedule, and we will continue to be releasing the schedule. For various reasons, it's not really appropriate to have the detail down to the last detail type schedule to be floating around, but this is something that we're working out, that we continue to work out with our subcontractor. But the main portions of the schedule will be released.
Okay, thank you. And then it says parking. Is there a shuttle proposed? When will that start? What are the exceptions? Why is that not in use now?
I guess I would need more definition on the shuttle, whether or not that's a shuttle for staff coming in off-site.
I think that's a shuttle for staff coming in off-site to keep parking impacts to a minimum within Bayridge.
What we've instructed our staff to do is to only have essential vehicles on site at that time. So we've asked people to park across the street and then to walk over if that vehicle is not essential for the work being done.
Okay. Will you have a shuttle during the actual work if you are building the system, or?
To shuttle our staff over?
Uh-huh.
No, they'll just walk over.
They'll just walk. So they're parking across the street and we'll walk. And I know you want to qualify this, so one moment.
So I don't know what the agreement was, but you know, in previous meetings we talked about having your staff, contractors, subcontractors park off-site, shuttle back and forth. Everybody talks about, well, when the project starts. This project has started. We have people on site. We have drill rigs. We are doing the work. I drove in at 10 o'clock Monday morning. You had 3 tasks being accomplished, not one. You had a drill rig, which also brought support staff with their own vehicles. You had a team of 3 that go around and do the routine monitoring, which brings 2 or 3 vehicles. And what else? Oh, and you also had somebody who was delivering and receiving the interior canisters. So there were 3 or 4 vehicles on site taking parking spots, especially in the back corner. HOA will tell you for 100 years, that's been our issue back there. When I parked that morning, I parked 200 yards from my home. I don't care, I like to walk. But and I'm just giving you information. As I'm walking back to my unit, another woman pulls up in a vehicle, her own vehicle. She parks in the red. She has a vest. All I said to her was, there's a lot of parking stalls down the street. And her response was, I'm only going to be here a couple minutes. So my question is, it seems like you're already circumventing what you committed to us. You could be implementing it now. They all could be parking across the street, or at a minimum, up front where we know there's no issue. We've piled bark mulch there, we've put plants up there. Why can't your people park or be asked or mandated to park in an area that's acceptable to everybody to reduce the inconvenience to the homeowner? Because it's happening now. It's not something in the future. It's now.
Excellent point, and I do realize I know exactly what you're talking about the circumstances of last week or earlier this week with 3 different crews being here, and that was an unfortunate circumstance. There is just timing sometimes where we have multiple crews here, so we will continue to work on that. We do have the need to have vehicles here. There is equipment that we need to load, and so sometimes it's unrealistic to have a vehicle that we need to load equipment in and out of in a faraway portion of the property. We will, however, noted, I take your comments very seriously. We will continue to work on it, and I continue to remind staff when they can park as far away from this corner as possible.
Yeah, it's not happening like you described. So please continue to implement or sit down with these people and hold them. Do they have to park up there? My next question is project manager.
Wait. I'm going to, I'm going to read it for you, and then I'm going to read it. So, Mike, this is to you.
Okay.
And it says, you've been introduced as the project manager, and shouldn't the project manager be on site? And why aren't you on site now?
I think it was Dong. You introduced Dong as your project safety coordinator.
Okay, so Dong as the project safety coordinator. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so when will he be on site, or she?
He was on site today.
He's on site today?
Yeah, Don was on site today. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, depending on the work that's being done, we have different crews on it. My role as a project manager is to oversee all of this. I'm not sure if your question was specific to me being on site.
No, I'm saying if Dong was on site, shouldn't he be monitoring the parking and stuff?
So the question
I
is,
see
if
what
Dong
you're-
was on site,
We're in the project now. You guys talk as if it's something.
okay, so I'm going to repeat this for the viewers. We are in the project now. Dong is on site. Why is he not monitoring parking more carefully and closely?
Understood. And I think, and again, depending on the crew that's out here, there may be a different responsible party out there, but I will continue to work with our field crews to remind them to impact the parking as little as they can in that area.
And maybe we have a meeting with them just to remind them of that, okay?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and then also just basic courtesy, how to say things. Okay, and then the other one is about the treatment system. I think you went into it, but I'm just going to read this quickly. Looks like a shed, prefab, not anything that was committed. Aesthetics are important. Consider faux windows, wood beam, trellis, etc. This was committed by a panel member at previous meetings, and it is unacceptable to show this rendering. Got that one. How will property values be monitored during this process? How do we sell homes without this becoming a concern and an impact to our home sales? And these are all by Rob Jones, 112 Hartford. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
So, first of all, we are not real estate professionals, and that part of that situation is not really something that we're qualified to be monitoring as we go through this. I do know that there is it a letter, comfort letter, there's information that the water board will provide regarding, what's happening at the site not transactionally wise, but, with respect to what the water board is looking to do.
We have, as folks are, trying to sell their property or rent it, we have spoken to a number of real estate agents and buyers and sellers and prospective renters, just to answer questions in stuff. I always say, I'm a geologist, so that's, I have my knowledge of this environmental work, the assessment and cleanup. That's where I'm the subject matter expert when it comes to real estate values and stuff. That's not something that we have authority over to discuss. So that's to the extent I can answer that, but I'm happy to answer any of those questions. And you know, I say the best thing to have when you're selling your home or renting it is having the indoor air data, having your home sampled and having those results. And then now with going, you know, if you have vapor intrusion, having the subslab depressurization system, that right there is, here's this issue, but we now know this home is protected because there is this pipe venting it out. It's been tested, confirmed, all of that. That right there is, as a geologist working in this line, that to me would be, you know, a valuable thing to have, information with actual data that says this is
Because you have
addressed.
certainty, I
Yeah.
think is what you're getting at. So, okay. Other questions? Sure, hang on.
Thank you. So I'm going to assume that you, for the unit, the extraction unit, you've looked at the real estate on the other side of the sidewalk. How come that is not an option? Because that seems, you know, you're not touching another home.
Sure, I can answer that. That's One Ford Road HOA property. Yeah, the sidewalk is a Newport Beach easement, and then directly to the right of that is One Ford Road property. Yeah, it's not there.
They're impacted by this, not like us, but.
So the question is that nothing can you work that out with them?
Right now, we are communicating with them based on the aesthetics of what is going in there as proposed.
But is that a question? I mean, is it
feasible?
Can you ask them?
Is it feasible for it to be on the other side of the sidewalk so we're not directly, basically on top of somebody else's?
Is that easement wide enough?
I don't know.
Can the
It has
building be
room
right
to
on
fit.
the street?
I did actually take measurements of the parkway on the other side of the street, and it's not wide enough for the building to fit.
Okay, so so it is not, it's One Ford Road owned, and the measurements on the other side of the sidewalk are not large enough to support the size of this building. Okay, that was a good question. Other questions? Yes?
Oh, wait.
Sure. Do we know how long this system building will be there once it's there?
So how long will the system be there once it's there?
So the limited term permit is only for 1 year. And there is a possibility that if we go back before the city of Newport Beach, that it might go for another year. What we have spoken with the water board and what we're also doing in our design calculations and the observations from the pilot test leads us to believe that we will have removed what we needed to remove within that year to 1 to 2 year time period. I have to say though, not everything always goes as planned, especially when you're trying to pull something out of the subsurface. So if there were extra time that was needed, we would have to continue with the SVE through some means. And even in talking with the city of Newport Beach, they understand this particular reality. The things that are in favor of this being shorter are that there is not that much mass. There isn't that much contaminant there to begin with. We found that out during the pilot test. And that we actually are getting a very good large radius of influence from what we're doing from each one, but from the pilot test from what we saw. So if that continues in that way for all 13 wells, we're very, very hopeful that this will be a shorter time period. What I can say with absolute certainty is if we don't do this, and we don't do it for a certain amount of time, then the vapor intrusion risks come back.
Okay.
I'll also say that within the time period that this building will be there, there may be times where we have use the system for 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 months, and then turn it off for a week or so to allow everything to come back to equilibrium in the subsurface, and then turn it on again. And this pulsing, if you will, actually is shown across the United States in most geologic settings like this to be incredibly effective in the removal of the mass.
And I'll
Okay.
add that's one of the kind of industry's lessons learned over the decades. Back in the day, you would operate the SV system and then, the amount of mass has like kind of flatlined, if you will, and we're not moving much, and they would shut it down and they would pull it off and they wouldn't look at it again. And we have learned, from the consulting side to the regulatory side, that doesn't work. That when it shuts off, concentrations rebound. And how much they rebound depends a lot on what is below the ground, the type of, the soil type and stuff. And so that's why they do that pulsing, is they've learned that over the years. And that is something we look at and want to make sure, because we haven't seen it here from the historical soil vapor extraction that was done, within the former facility, but there have been other sites where they operated it, shut it down, and you go back and the concentrations are just the same. We don't expect that here because we have collected data from within One Ford Road where there was soil vapor extraction, and those concentrations are almost, or so low. We're not seeing that vapor intrusion risk like we are here. And so that's one of those assurances why we know this is a solid plan to clean up and get kind of out of your backyards and front yards.
Okay. Other questions? Anybody have a card? No? Okay. So just, first of all, thank you, everybody, for hanging in there and for your participation. We will stay after and answer any questions anybody might have. And I wish you all a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.